My girlfriend keeps pushing me to get married. How should I handle this? I'm a 29M and my girlfriend, Sarah, 27F, has been bringing up marriage a lot. We've been dating for almost 4 years, and don't get me wrong, I love her. She's smart, funny, and incredibly kind. But here's the thing, every time she hints at us taking the next step, I freeze up. It started subtly about a year ago, casual comments about friends getting married or the type of venue she liked. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just small talk. But over the past few months, it's escalated. She's outright asked, "When do you see us getting married?" And honestly, I didn't know what to say. Here's my dilemma. I grew up watching my parents' messy marriage and even messy divorce. Marriage, to me, feels like stepping into a trap where everything could fall apart. On the other hand, Sarah sees marriage as the ultimate commitment, a natural next step for two people in love. I tried deflecting the topic, saying things like, "Why rush?" or, "Let's enjoy what we have." But Sarah's been saying stuff like, "I'm not sure I can wait forever." It's not just talk anymore. It's become this looming thing between us, and I don't know how to handle it. I don't want to lose her, but I also don't want to rush into something I'm not ready for. I'll be honest, I've been avoiding the conversation. Whenever Sarah brings it up, I either change the subject or give vague answers that, frankly, feel like cop-outs. But last week, things came to a head. We were at her cousin's wedding, surrounded by fairy lights, heartfelt speeches, and way too many people who kept asking, "So, when's it your turn?" Sarah laughed it off at first, but I could tell it was getting to her. On the ride home, she finally said, "Do you even want to marry me someday, or am I wasting my time?" Her voice cracked. I could see how much this was hurting her, and it killed me. But I panicked. Instead of giving her a straight answer, I said something like, "Marriage isn't everything, you know? We're happy as we are." Wrong move. Sarah got quiet, too quiet. And when we got to my apartment, she didn't even come inside. She just sat in her car and said, "We need to figure this out." Now I feel like I'm at a crossroads. I don't want to lose her, but the idea of marriage terrifies me. The permanence of it, the expectations, the fear that it might not work out, it's all paralyzing. I don't know if it's my past holding me back or if I just genuinely don't want this. But Sarah deserves clarity, and I'm running out of ways to stall. Over the next few days, I could feel the tension between us. Sarah wasn't being her usual bubbly self, and I hated knowing I was the reason. So, I decided to talk to someone about it, my best friend, Josh. He's been married for a couple of years and always seems to have his life together. If anyone could give me some perspective, it was him. "Man, you can't keep dodging this," Josh said after I spilled everything. "Sarah clearly loves you, but you're stringing her along if you don't figure out what you want." "I'm not stringing her along," I argued, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Josh asked a tough question, "Do you see yourself with her forever? If you do, then why not get married?" And that's when I realized my problem wasn't Sarah, it was me. I've always seen marriage as a gamble, one where the odds felt stacked against me. My parents' relationship was a disaster from start to finish. They married young, fought constantly, and when they finally divorced, I became the pawn in their endless custody battle. I promised myself I'd never end up like them. But Sarah isn't my parents. Josh gave me a nudge, "You're not your dad. And Sarah's not your mom. If you love her, maybe you owe it to yourself to at least talk about why you're scared." He was right. I couldn't keep avoiding this. Sarah deserved the truth, even if it was messy. That weekend, I decided I couldn't keep Sarah in the dark anymore. If I didn't start being honest, I'd lose her, and maybe I'd deserve to. We went out for coffee at her favorite cafe. She looked nervous, like she was bracing for bad news. I felt a lump in my throat as I tried to figure out where to start. "Sarah," I said, finally breaking the silence. "We need to talk about what you said the other night, about marriage." Her expression softened a little, but she stayed quiet, waiting. "I want you to know it's not that I don't love you or see a future with you. I do, I said, and I meant it. But the idea of marriage, it scares me. A lot. She leaned forward. Why? What about it scares you? And so, for the first time, I opened up. I told her about my parents' divorce, how ugly it was, how it made me feel like I was caught in a war that I never signed up for. How I'd promised myself I'd never end up like them. Sarah listened carefully, her eyes full of empathy. I'm sorry you went through that, she said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. But you know, you're not your parents. And we're not them either. I wanted to believe her. But a part of me wondered if anyone could really know that for sure. She hesitated, before speaking again. Do you think you'll ever want to get married? Not just to me, but at all? That question hit me like a freight train. It wasn't something I'd ever allowed myself to think about seriously. I could tell Sarah wasn't asking for an answer right then, but her patience wasn't endless. I don't know, I admitted. But I do know I want to be with you. I need some time to figure this out. Sarah nodded, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. I'll give you time, she said. But I can't wait forever. I need to know that we're moving toward the same future. I knew then that the clock was ticking. The days after our talk were tough. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah's words, I can't wait forever. It wasn't a threat, it was a truth. She wanted a future with me, and I needed to decide if I could give her that, or if I was wasting her time. I booked a session with my therapist, someone I'd been seeing on and off for years. When I explained the situation, he didn't judge me, but he did push me to dig deeper. What does marriage represent to you? He asked. Failure, I said without hesitation. People think it's forever, but for so many, it ends in heartbreak. I don't want to risk that. He nodded thoughtfully. And what does staying with Sarah but avoiding marriage represent? That question hit me hard. It wasn't a way to protect her or our relationship, it was a way to protect myself. My therapist helped me see that my fear of marriage wasn't about Sarah. It was about my parents. I'd been letting their mistakes dictate my choices, and that wasn't fair to me, or to Sarah. Later that week, I took Sarah out for dinner, determined to show her I was serious about working through this. I told her about the therapy session and my realization that I'd been holding on to fear instead of hope. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. So, where does that leave us? I'm not ready to get married tomorrow, I admitted. But I don't want to lose you. I want to keep working on this, with you. Her smile was small but genuine. That's all I needed to hear, she said. For now, we're taking things one step at a time. I started attending therapy regularly, and Sarah's been incredibly supportive. I still don't have all the answers, but for the first time, I feel like we're facing this together instead of standing on opposite sides of the issue. I love my boyfriend, but there's a real lack of intimacy and romance in our relationship. It has me concerned about how things would be if we had kids. What's happening here? I don't know when it started, the slow decay of romance between Daniel and me. It wasn't dramatic, like a slammed door or a shouting match. It was more like water evaporating from a glass left on the windowsill, silent and unnoticed until one day, it's just gone. I met Daniel 5 years ago, and he felt like home the moment I saw him. He was quiet but steady, the kind of person who anchored me when I felt like life's storms were about to sweep me away. We clicked instantly, sharing a love for long walks, quiet evenings, and discussions that ranged from deep to downright silly. Back then, it felt like we couldn't get enough of each other. But now? Now we sit in the same room, him engrossed in his laptop and me scrolling through my phone, the silence thick and oppressive. We barely touch, except for the perfunctory kisses on the cheek or the occasional cuddle when watching a movie. Our conversations have become transactional, what's for dinner, or did you pay the internet bill? I told myself it was normal. People grow comfortable, right? Love matures. But there's a difference between comfort and disconnection, and I'm starting to feel like we've crossed that line. The issue wasn't just the lack of physical intimacy, though that stung more than I cared to admit. It was the absence of effort. Birthdays passed with generic gifts and hastily scribbled cards. Romantic getaways turned into weekends at home doing laundry. Daniel seemed content, but I felt like a houseplant slowly wilting in the shadows. The worst part? I want to have children someday, but the thought of bringing a child into this emotional void terrifies me. How can we raise a happy family if we can't even find joy in each other anymore? It came to a head one evening when I found myself staring at an old photo of us. We were on a hike, Daniel's arm slung around me, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he whispered something that made me laugh so hard my stomach hurt. I couldn't remember the last time we laughed like that. Do you ever miss it? I blurted out, breaking the silence. Daniel looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. Miss what? This. Us. I gestured to the photo. The way we used to be. He sighed, closing his laptop and rubbing the bridge of his nose. Of course I do, but things change. Life gets busy. Busy. It was always the excuse. Work, bills, errands. But I didn't want busy, I wanted him. Daniel, when's the last time we even? I don't know, had a date night? Or just sat down and talked about something other than chores? He shrugged. I didn't know it bothered you so much. You should have said something. I'm saying it now, I said, my voice shaking. I love you, Daniel, but I feel like we're drifting. And if we can't figure this out, how can we even think about having kids? That got his attention. He leaned forward, his face suddenly serious. Is that what this is about? Kids? It's about us, I said. But yes, it's about kids too. I want a family someday, but I don't want to bring a child into a relationship that feels so hollow. Daniel looked stunned, as if I'd hit him with a truth he wasn't ready to face. For a moment, I thought he might get defensive, tell me I was overreacting. But instead, he simply said, I don't know what to say. The air between us felt fragile, as if the slightest wrong move could shatter whatever remained of our connection. I took a deep breath, deciding to venture further into this uncomfortable territory. Maybe we could try something new, I suggested cautiously. Like setting aside time each week just for us. No distractions, no work, just us. Daniel considered this, his eyes flickering with something that resembled the man I fell in love with. You mean like a date night? Exactly. We used to have those all the time. Remember how we'd try a new restaurant every Friday? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You always picked the places with the weirdest menus. And you complained every time, I chuckled. But you secretly loved it. He nodded, the smile fading slightly. I guess I did. Look, Daniel, I know life gets hectic. But if we don't make time for each other, we're going to keep drifting apart. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. You're right. I've been so wrapped up in work that I didn't notice how far we drifted. Work is important, but so are we, I said softly. I miss you. He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin. I miss you too. Let's try to fix this. Relief washed over me. Thank you. Maybe we can also consider talking to someone, a counselor or therapist. Just to help us navigate things better. He hesitated but then nodded. If it helps us get back on track, I'm willing to try. A weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. And about having kids. He squeezed my hand gently. Let's work on us first. Then we can talk about expanding our family. Agreed, I smiled. Just then, his phone buzzed on the table, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen and sighed. It's work. Let it go to voicemail, I said, almost pleading. He hesitated before pressing the power button to turn it off completely. They can wait. That simple act felt monumental. How about we go for a walk? I suggested. Like old times. He stood up, still holding my hand. I'd like that. As we stepped outside, the cool evening air felt refreshing against my skin. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of the city humming softly around us. Remember when we got caught in that rainstorm? Daniel asked, suddenly. I laughed. We were drenched by the time we got home. But we couldn't stop laughing, he added, smiling at the memory. Maybe we just need more moments like that, I said. He looked at me thoughtfully. Maybe we do. For a couple of weeks, it felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. Our first date night was a modest dinner at a hole-in-the-wall Italian restaurant. The food was unremarkable, but the conversation flowed like it hadn't in years. We laughed, reminisced, and even shared dessert, a small but meaningful victory. But then, as if on cue, life crept back in. One evening, I came home excited to show Daniel tickets I'd bought for a jazz concert. He was hunched over his laptop, earbuds in, immersed in what I could only assume was another endless work project. I touched his shoulder lightly to get his attention. Hey, I said, holding up the tickets. Guess what? Jazz concert this Friday. He pulled out an earbud, glancing at the tickets. This Friday? He asked, his tone flat. Yeah, it's going to be amazing. I checked your calendar, there's nothing scheduled. He sighed and rubbed his temples. I might have to work late. There's this project deadline coming up. My heart sank. Daniel, we talked about this. We agreed to make time for each other. I know, and I'm trying, he said defensively. But I can't just drop everything. This is my job. And I'm your partner, I snapped, immediately regretting the sharpness of my tone. I'm not asking for a grand gesture, Daniel. Just one night. He stared at me for a moment before closing his laptop with a loud click. Fine. I'll go. The bitterness in his voice was like a slap. That's not what I want, I said quietly. I don't want you to come out of obligation. I want you to want to spend time with me. I do want to spend time with you, he said, his voice softening. But I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough. That's not fair, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for effort. He stood there, his shoulders sagging, looking as defeated as I felt. Maybe we need to slow down, he said finally. Take smaller steps. The word stung, but I nodded. Okay. Smaller steps. That Friday, Daniel didn't make it to the jazz concert. I went alone, the empty seat beside me a harsh reminder of how far we still had to go. The empty seat beside me at the concert haunted me more than I expected. The music was breathtaking, soulful and rich, each note resonating with emotions I couldn't quite name. I kept imagining Daniel sitting there, his arm around me, his face lighting up with the occasional smile. But all I had was a phantom presence, a reminder of the life I wanted but didn't seem able to reach. When I got home, the apartment was dark except for the faint glow of Daniel's laptop. He was asleep on the couch, his face slack with exhaustion, a forgotten notebook still clutched in his hand. For a moment, I stood there, torn between anger and heartbreak. The next morning, I finally broke. I don't think I can do this anymore, I said, standing in the kitchen as he stirred sugar into his coffee. My voice wavered, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. Daniel froze, the spoon clinking softly against the mug. Do what? This, whatever we've become. I feel like I'm always fighting for us, and you're just coasting. And I'm tired, Daniel. I'm so tired. He put the spoon down and leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. You think I don't care? That I'm not trying? I know you care, I said, my voice trembling. But caring isn't enough. Love isn't enough if there's no effort behind it. His jaw tightened. You act like I don't have pressures too. I'm not sitting here ignoring you on purpose. I'm juggling 100 things, and sometimes I drop the ball. And the ball you keep dropping is me, I said softly. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. He looked away, his shoulders slumping. So what now? Do you want to break up? No, I said quickly, the thought twisting my stomach into knots. I don't want that. But I also don't want this. I think we need help, real help. You mean counseling, he said, his voice flat. Yes. Counseling. A therapist who can help us figure this out before it's too late. He stared into his coffee, his expression a mixture of resignation and uncertainty. Okay, he said finally. If that's what it takes. Relief and apprehension washed over me simultaneously. I knew this wasn't a guarantee, but it was something, a small light in the suffocating dark. The following week, we had our first counseling session. Sitting in that room, pouring our hearts out to a stranger, felt both terrifying and liberating. We talked about our fears, our frustrations, and the growing distance that had crept into our relationship like a shadow. And for the first time in years, I felt like Daniel truly heard me. As they embark on this path, the question lingers, will they find their way back to each other, or will they discover that their love, though deep, may not be enough to bridge the gaps? What do you think they should focus on to heal their relationship? Or is it time to reconsider what love means to them both? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.